everybody. I'm Josh.
And I am Alyssa.
And we are back. Brand spanking new episode of The Podcast Was on Fire.
And it wasn't my fault.
A read-along pod where we dig into the good, the great, and the problematic of the Dresden Files series by Jim Butcher. I'm an old Dresden vet.
And this is my first time through.
And together, we try to see what this whole wizard stuff's all about. How you doing today, Ice?
I'm doing well.
Oh, good, good, good.
How about you?
Oh, living the dream. Trying to get my ducks in a row.
That's always good.
Working in the backyard a little bit. So I'm sweating all over the place. Making some shrimp scampi for dinner tonight.
Ooh, fancy pants.
Hopefully that'll work out. We'll see. No promises.
Hey.
But you're all invited. Goodness gracious. What's going on in your neck of the woods?
Not a whole heck of a lot.
Get ready for you're a big Halloween fan, as I'm sure people picked up on.
Shocking, I know. I do love me some Halloween.
Any big plans or?
I've got a couple friends coming into town this weekend.
Okay.
So it'll be fun. And I'm also working, so that's going to be a nice balance.
Yeah, my buddy wants to maybe come over here and have his kid. They're like little, like 6 and 2 or something like that. But might come trick-or-treating around my neck of the woods.
Oh, fun. It's a good area to trick-or-treat.
Yeah, we'll see. It's not as good as it used to be. A lot of old lokes, yeah.
They got old.
But definitely, this area, I'm sure they can find some good stuff.
More fun to go.
So not confirmed yet, but that was a soft plan, and trying to hopefully that happens, because otherwise I'll have to drive all the way out to their house.
That's some fun.
But little kid Halloween, ain't nothing better.
Exactly.
All right. Besides that, how about obviously we're between novels here. We're just starting today on the first chunk, the first 6 chapters of Proven Guilty, which is book 8. Lyssy read the first couple lines last week. Some warden and black magic shenanigans here. This novel came out in May 2006. Most of them come out towards the end of the year, or have in the past, and that's when Battleground as well. So this is a little bit shaking things up here, coming out in the spring, maybe giving some love to the summer court. This is, again, like Deadbeat. This one also was printed in hardcover right from the get-go. It's the 8th novel in the series. He's finally starting to pick up some steam here as an author, as a noted author at this point. And yeah, continuing to just keep crushing. Very good stuff. You want to give us kind of broad strokes here so we get into the novel?
Sure. So when we last saw our plucky hero, he was riding a reanimated Tyrannosaur through the streets of Chicago, as one does, and he was defeating the necromancers. We are currently, the White Council and the Red Court vampires are at war. Last we heard, the Red Court vampires had killed a whole lot of folks and had depleted the wardens down to very, very few. So Harry got drafted into their ranks. He is now a warden. And let's see here. We've got Lashiel, who is a blackened denarian, who his coin had touched Harry's hand, and he has a little bit of her kicking around in his head. The actual coin is buried deep in the bowels of his laboratory in his sub-basement. Murphy came back from vacation with Kincaid in Hawaii, and we learned Thomas is his brother, and they are shacked up, not like that, in his pseudo-studio apartment. That's not really a studio.
It is a 1-bedroom.
It is definitely a 1-bedroom.
A small basement 1-bedroom.
But he calls it a studio. A studio wouldn't have a door between the bed and the rest of the joint, so.
Also, just a quick correction there. Lashiel is not a blackened denarius. She is a knight thereof.
Okay.
The blackened denarius are the actual coin.
Okay.
One of the denominations of coins way back yonder was the denarius.
Gotcha.
Or denarian. Denarius, yeah. Although that wouldn't have been what Judas was paid in, which is kind of the reference there, but
Yeah.
it's a cooler sounding name than Shekel, probably, or whatever.
Probably, very likely.
Knights of the Black and Shekel. I don't even know if Shekel is the right one, but whatever the other denomination is. This is probably pretty controversial, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that was definitely at least top 3 reanimated Tyrannosaur scenes in my life.
I
At
mean,
least. Maybe top 4.
it's up there. It's definitely up there.
Such a great scene. Any opportunity to keep referencing
amazing.
that one, I'm going to keep bringing it up. I mentioned
our girl Sue.
Sue does crush. I mentioned on the Facebook that was I mean, obviously you're 7 books in, you're probably pretty hooked, but that one was just like, I went from a guy that reads this series to like full blown get an imaginary hat and a long duster. Didn't literally do that, but I did get the imaginary hat. Just full blown Dresdener, and hopefully we got our hooks in Lyssy, although we might have gotten them in a little bit earlier than that. But yeah, it just absolutely smashes any possibility of getting away from this book novel series, pretty much no matter what we do here moving forward. So I'm pretty much locked in. But yeah, Proven Guilty is the next one in the queue. And again, we start to grow our understanding and the world of the White Council, which we've seen this again. This isn't unique to the series or anything like that, but as you get deeper and deeper into any series, you obviously can flesh out some of the things that maybe you didn't have fleshed out in your brain, or you did, right? Either way, you can't just shove all that expo into the first novel, obviously, or no one will read it. Even Tolkien started with The Hobbit, right? But it is really cool to see and kind of how Harry fits into this. That's been kind of a back burner overarching plot thread through this whole series, is how Harry fits in with the White Council, right? Morgan was a big part of book 1 and the Doom of Damocles, his extended probation, basically, from black magic himself. So this is an interesting, I mentioned last week that we saw what could have happened to Harry. Snip, snip, jiggle, jiggle. But yeah, I mean, obviously the A plots have been, the main plots of the story, but it's always been this huge part of this series, and Harry's psyche is how everything intersects with the White Council.
And where he fits into that world.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't fit into that world.
Yeah, he really doesn't, because he joined it so late, but he's super powerful. We saw he's already passed up a lot of like disciplined official apprentices, timeline and power wise, right?
Mm-hmm. But it also has allowed us to kind of learn and grow with Harry as that outsider.
Yeah, he's like the audience's stand-in.
100%.
Like we saw in the meeting when he couldn't speak Latin, right? Ed was translating for Harry, but also for us, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, Harry is the only warden that isn't super into this. Capital punishment, right?
Yeah.
And we've learned before there are 7 laws of magic, and there's 1.5 punishments. One is you get your head chopped off by a warden. The other is a member of the council can basically take you in and vouch for you and risk their own well-being taking care of you. And Ebenezer obviously did that for Harry. But we learn a little bit about how black magic works in this chunk. And I don't want to get too deep into it, so I want to get through the read through here, but it is really interesting, the stain it leaves. Last novel was talking a lot about, can you use black magic for good? And it seemed to lean into the yes. And this novel seems to be pushing back against that, right?
100%.
So there was some kid speaking Korean, and he had enslaved a number of his family members, enthralled them, taken over their minds, basically had an army of assassins and slaves of all kinds. And it was no bueno, of course. And so
reminiscent of the Renfields.
Yeah, they do mention there's some similarity to what happens to when a mind breaks.
Yeah.
It is similar to the Renfields for sure. And we know that the Renfields, there was no coming back from.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a real danger in this type of mind magic. And we saw Corpse Taker mucking around in Harry's mind last novel, as well as Lashiel. So it just adds an interesting threat level to those interactions.
Well, and it's for a reader, it's that thread of knowledge.
Mhm.
You know, because it is very much. I like the word. I like that you use the word threat, because it is a threat. There's a threat of the knowledge that what could happen, and the way that it's portrayed is gnarly, scary shit.
Yeah, it just adds some tension and some weight to all this stuff with Lashiel, because we know, again, it's different than a mortal, but it is still, the mind can be broken when someone mucks around in it, and we know Lashiel has been doing that. The last 4 novels actually in the series are just ... scribbles, because his mind is broken.
Exactly.
So Harry yaks after they cut off the dude's head, and he's like twitching,
Understandably.
which is just awful. I think even Lyssy would be uncomfortable in this scenario.
Yeah.
I would have sprinted out of the circle long ago.
My philosophy is, if they're moving, it's not my problem. So yes, this would be very disturbing.
Give it a minute, then I'll slide in. Harry calls it murder, which is obviously a loaded word, and I used that term last week as well to refer to the death of Cassius. And we kind of had a back and forth, and I ended up siding with Lyssy that call it homicide, not murder, right? Because it was still kind of in a battle, but the Merlin brings up, he says, as Harry is basically just disgusted with this whole process, not necessarily opposed, because he knows kind of the only option, but it still disgusts him to take
100%.
the life of a child. And he uses the word murder, and the Merlin says, accusing someone else of murder is hardly a stone you are in a position to cast, Warden Dresden. Did you not discharge a firearm into the back of the head of a woman you merely believed to be the corpse taker from a distance of a few feet away, fatally wounding her? And he had. It was, as he calls it, one of the bigger coin tosses of my life. He made that decision really quickly, and it was a big one, and it saved Lucio's life and the captain of the Wardens, and it obviously ended up saving Harry's life in the medium term, and saved a lot of people's lives long term. But it was certainly a calculated risk. Something like what they're doing here is it obviously leaves a stain on you to cut a kid's head off, but is that stain going to be worse than what this kid is going to do because of what has happened to his mind? They compare the two and stuff, but again, we get more info on kind of how the laws of magic, why the laws of magic are set up. The Merlin says, the laws of magic are all that prevent wizards from abusing their power over mortals. There is no room for compromise.
The laws of magic are the only thing. That's very, very much, might be controversial, but that's very much the concept of organized religion, where, well, the fear of hell is the only thing keeping people from doing bad things.
Which we touched on last week that I don't believe.
No, not at all.
But yeah, that is certainly.
But that was something when he said that really very much popped out to me.
And you bring that up, the rote repetition of peace by all the wardens, and you kind of refer to it as cult-like, but yeah, I would hesitate to go that far, because there isn't really the Merlin isn't really worshipped by there's no real cult leader. It's more, and we've seen Harry have kind of that religious zeal for magic, right? That connection where his faith is represented by his pentacle, and that's absolutely a great comparison. And kind of for the same reason, they believe that hell will break loose basically if they don't uphold the laws.
Yeah. And I understand the whole concept, but it was very much that stood out to me.
Oh, no,
because
for sure.
That is frequently an argument for organized religion.
Yeah, no, I wasn't defending. I was just kind of.
But no, it was something that kind of piqued my interest, grabbed my attention. Because there are a lot of references to kind of the way people respond to things in almost a religious zealotry sort of mode.
Yeah, and the old Latin and stuff. There's definitely some connections there, and I don't know if we're necessarily supposed to
find that, but
look at it that way. But I think that definitely had at least some influence on, if not the structure, at least kind of.
It's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't have anything against organized religion. I don't participate in it. But I think that it's that zealotry that you become concerned with. And later he has when he talks about the Merlin with Murphy, or actually, no, with Ebenezer, maybe, about how all it takes is he does one thing wrong and it's treason. It's very much also like the concept of monarchy. All the king has to say is he committed treason, and off with their heads. Very Henry VIII.
Yeah, and there are some checks on the Merlin, as we've seen. He wanted to get rid of Harry. So, it is a political body like anything else. But you're right. There is just some, I don't want to say zealotry in even necessarily a bad way, but like it usually has a negative connotation, I guess. But there is certainly we see it with Morgan kind of going beyond, but that like rote response of like peace, definitely I felt that a little bit as well.
Yeah.
But there's a couple interesting things here that maybe we'll talk about a little bit later, because it references something that comes up in a moment here. But yeah, the Merlin says that the laws exist for a reason, and they must stand as written. And Harry had actually gotten some blood from the capitation on his face and his cloak, and he said, I can see what they're written in. This exchange: you are a warden, Dresden. You must focus on your duty to mortals and the council, which sometimes means killing children, which means always enforcing the laws. It is your duty now more than ever. So
the other thing I wanted to point out, because Merlin is talking about the laws, and he says the laws exist for a reason, but they must stand as written. Yeah, remember last week we were talking about letter of the law versus spirit of the law.
Mm-hmm.
And I just that popped into my head when I read that, where it's like, oh, they must stand as written.
Yeah, and so that's actually the line I was going to talk about a little bit later. But
sorry.
No, it's fine. Just because you bring it up, though, there's in a minute here we're going to learn that the gatekeeper is nudging the sixth law. He's not traveling through. He's not swimming against the currents of time, but he's somehow receiving or sending messages that Bob mentions a couple pathways that are not against the laws.
So Harry heads out of the warehouse, and Ebenezer stops him. He says, there's something I need to speak to you about. He says, the war isn't going well. And Harry says, I've read the reports. They say that the Venatori Umbrorium and the Fellowship of St. Giles have really pitched in. It's more than that. If they hadn't started up an offensive to slow the vamps down, the Red Court would have destroyed the council months ago. So we learned that the Venatorium and the Fellowship of St. Giles were White Council's primary allies in the war. The Venatori were an ancient secret brotherhood joined together to fight supernatural darkness wherever they could. Sort of like the Masons, only with more flamethrowers. By and large, they were academic sorts, and though several of the Venatori had various forms of military experience, their true strength lay in utilizing human legal systems and analyzing information brought together from widely dispersed sources. Kind of like the lawyers for the mob. The Fellowship, which we had heard about a few books ago, where Susan was going to join the Fellowship, and they are a group of not quite turned vampires. St. Giles is the patron saint of lepers and outcasts. His fellowship, while not a full-blown powers like the council or one of the vampire courts, was nonetheless proving to be a surprisingly formidable ally. The allies can't challenge the vampires in face-to-face confrontation, but they're wreaking havoc on the Red Court supply chains, intelligence, and support. And this is concepts of war, And we learn that Lucio is working on rebuilding the Warden Corps. And Harry says, don't see what else I can do to help, unless you're wanting someone to go start fathering new wizards.
No, Harry.
No, Harry. No. There's something you don't know. The Merlin decided it was not for general knowledge. You remember the Red Court's attack last year, that they called up outsiders and assaulted us within the realm of the fairy itself. Bad move, so I've heard. The fairies are going to take it out of their hides. So we all thought. In fact, Summer declared war on the Red Court and began preliminary assaults on them. But Winter hasn't responded, and Summer hasn't done much more than secure its borders. Queen Mab didn't declare war? No, Never thought she'd pass up the chance. She's all about carnage and bloodshed. It surprised us as well, so I have a favor to ask you. Find out why. You have contacts within the courts. Find out what's happening. Find out why the She haven't gone to war. So this adds a whole other layer of this mess. Because as we know, I mean, the She are they're an embattled populace, basically. They'll fight for just about anything. And especially this is a huge affront to them. So that's why, and Queen Mab, of all creatures, hasn't declared war is kind of a big glaring problem here.
Certainly pops, right?
Oh, definitely. And Harry asks, well, don't you have like embassy or somebody, high level people in there that they can talk to? Even those in the spiritual realms, there's another level entirely to the war and the conflict between spiritual spies and emissaries of everyone involved. And our embassy to the She has been, well, you know them as well as anyone. They've been polite, open, spoken with complete honesty, and left you no idea what is going on. Precisely. So what is the senior council asking me to find out? Not the senior council. Myself. A few others. What others? People I trust. The traitor. The vampires of the Red Court had been a little too on top of the game to be merely lucky. Somehow they had been obtaining vital secrets about the dispositions of the White Council's forces and their plans. Someone on the inside had been feeding the vampires information, and a lot of wizards had died because of it. You think the traitor is someone on the senior council. I think we can't take any chances. This is an official business. I can't order you to do it, Harry. I understand if you don't want to, but there's no one better for the job. And our allies cannot maintain the current pace of operations for long. Their best weapon has always been secrecy, and their actions have forced them to pay a terrible cost of lives to give us what aid they have. And then Merlin and Morgan come out, and Ebenezer kind of changes tack here. Because obviously this is in secrecy. He doesn't want anybody else to know. And that kind of side fake conversation still has a moment. And Harry says, that could have been me in there today. I could have been that kid. That was a long time ago. You were barely more than a child. So was he. And then we learned that they came to Chicago because Chicago is a big city. It's harder for the Red Court to find folks there. And then there's the way Chicago seems to be inimical to the health of any vampire who comes here. That's a pretty good cover story. What's the truth? It wasn't my idea. But Merlin called the meeting here. He wanted to send me a message, kill two birds with one stone. He wanted you stripped of your position as a warden. But Lucio is still the technical commander of the wardens, though Morgan commands in the field. She supported you, and the rest of the senior council overruled him. Bet he loved that. I thought he was having a stroke. I know. Joy. I didn't want the job to begin with. I know. You got rocks and hard places, boy. Not much else. Which is a really good way to describe it. I kind of loved that. And so, the Merlin figured out this could scare Harry into towing the line, into this is just another sword of Damocles hanging over his head. And he says, I take it there's no word on the attack last year. No one found with mysterious sums of money dumped into their bank account that would incriminate a traitor? Not yet. Then with the traitor running around loose, all the Merlin has to do is wait for me to screw up. Then he can call it treason and squish me. He genuinely believes that you are a threat to the council. If your behavior confirms his belief, he'll do whatever is necessary to stop you. There was another guy like that once. Name him McCarthy. If the Merlin wants to find a traitor, he'll find one, whether or not one actually exists. And then Ebenezer gives him a letter from the gatekeeper. He was the quietest of the wizards on the senior council, and even the Merlin showed him plenty of respect, which says a lot, because it's Merlin's kind of an ass, but he kind of has to be. The letter says, Dresden. In the past 10 days, there have been repeated acts of black magic in Chicago. As the senior warden in the region, it falls to you to investigate and find those responsible. In my opinion, it is vital that you do so immediately. To my knowledge, no one else is aware of the situation. Rashid. Great. More black magic in Chicago. If it wasn't some raving, psychotic, black-headed bad guy, it was probably another kid like the one who died a few minutes ago. There wasn't a whole lot of in between. And he says he could deal with the murderous madman, but he doesn't think he could handle the other. which is understandable. He sees himself in that. And Harry is such a protector kind of character that, I mean, that totally makes sense. The gatekeeper had trusted me to handle whatever was wrong. That was almost worse. Man, sometimes I get tired of being the guy who is supposed to deal with undeal-withable situations. I love that. And Ebenezer tells Harry he looks different. As far as I knew, Ebenezer was unaware of the entity who was leasing out the unused portions of my brain, and I wanted to keep it that way. But though he had a reputation for being something of a magical brawler, his specialty, the summing up of primal, destructive forces, he had a lot more on the ball than most of the council had given him credit for. It was entirely possible he had sensed something of the fallen angel's presence in me. And, he tells Ebenezer about how his hand's getting a little bit better. He can drive. Butters hasn't playing the guitar. And Ebenezer invites him to lunch. There wasn't anything in his tone to indicate it, but I could read the subtext. Ebenezer had been a mentor to me at a time I badly needed it. He taught me just about everything I knew, everything I thought was important enough to be worth knowing. He'd been an unfailingly generous, patient, loyal, and kind to me, but he had been lying to me the whole time, ignoring the principles he had been teaching me. And that's a huge betrayal. And Harry, I don't think Harry's ever going to let that go. I think he's going to hold on to that for quite a while.
It's one of those things that, like, but I mean, even if
understandably,
if they ever get past it, this is always going to be a thing. It fundamentally changed their relationship. It changed everything about it.
Oh, and every part of Harry's memories. Like, I mean, you would second guess everything. I know from personal experience with big lies, you second guess everything you thought. You truly do. You don't know what was true, what wasn't, and it fucks with your head. And so I can't imagine this is someone who raised him, someone who kind of guided him in the hardest part of his life, and how just fucked up his head must be about it. And Harry said that he, death threats in the guise of formal decapitations sort of ruined my appetite, which is reasonable. And Harry drives away. But Ebenezer was right. I was probably the only one on the council with acquaintances in both the summer and winter courts of the Sidhe. If anyone on the council could find out, it was me. Yippee. And just to keep things interesting, I needed to hunt down some kind of unspecified black magic and put a stop to it. That was what the wardens spent all their time doing when they weren't fighting a war, and what I'd done 2 or 3 times myself. But it wasn't ever pretty. Black magic means a black practitioner of some kind, and they tend to be the sorts of people who are both happy to kill an interfering wizard and able to manage it. Fairies, black magic. It never rains, but it pours.
It certainly does. Between one heartbeat and the next, the passenger seat of the Blue Beetle was suddenly occupied. I let out a yelp and nearly bounced my car off of a delivery truck. The tires squealed in protest and I started to slide. I turned into it and recovered, as a clever Chicagoan would do, knowing how to deal with slides. I slid a couple times when I was driving in Toronto, and I had my all-weather Southern California tires and my all-weather Southern California driving abilities. And it was very Jesus take the wheel. Every time it happened. I was careful, but it was
Yeah. No, driving in snow and ice is pretty scary because you don't have any, like, the lack of control is terrifying, especially if, the worst thing you're used to driving in is sunshine.
The first rain of a season gets people a little rowdy up down here. But yeah, there was one where I was driving really slow, so it wasn't particularly dangerous per se, but the light turned red and I was driving probably 20, 25 miles an hour. Like, it was, icy on the road, and I was just trying to get home from practice. And like, so I hit the brake and nothing happened. I just kept going. I was like, well,
Yep.
I'm going to go through this light. And it was late at night. Luckily, it was like 10 o'clock. So like, and nobody was there. And I just kept sliding all the way through and, came out the other side all squeaky clean. But it was one of those like, this could be it, guys. It's been real.
This could be bad. Thankfully, you weren't going very fast. Well, when I had to take emergency vehicle operations training, like a 40-hour course, and every couple of years you update it. And one of the things you learn is driving in and out of skids, because they make you go into a skid. And it is nerve-wracking, even in a controlled environment.
Probably even more so because were you being like rated?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not fun. But I know how to do it. And I've actually had to do it a couple times where it's like, oh shit, I know how to handle this.
Yeah, my second winter, I got a lot better at, turning into it and stuff, and having the proper tires and all that.
That helps, I'm sure.
Failing to prepare is preparing to fail, Ice.
Yes, it is, sir.
I digress. But if his car had another coat of paint on it, I'd have collided with the one next to me. My heart in my throat. I got the car moving smoothly again and turned to glare at the sudden passenger. Lashiel, a.k.a. the Temptress, a.k.a. the Web Weaver, and some of her chosen names. Apparently some kind of photocopy.
K is known as.
That's fair. Some kind of photocopy of the personality of a fallen angel sat in the passenger seat. She looked like anything she chose, but her most common form, I'm sure especially for Harry, was that of a tall, athletic blonde wearing a white Greek-style tunic that fell almost to her knee. She sat with her hands in her lap, staring out the front of the car, smiling very slightly.
Scared the shit
out of him. She's having fun doing it.
Of course.
He tells her to put a seatbelt on, and I love when she tries to pull rank. Mortal, I have no physical form. I exist nowhere except within your mind. There is no reason for me to wear a seatbelt. It's the principle. My car, my brain, my rules. She does put on the seatbelt. She acquiesces despite putting on a tough face. And I do love that she didn't just like I Dream of Jeannie it. She actually reached back and put it on like to put on the show.
I Dream of Jeannie it, not gonna lie. I was fully expecting it.
Well, I love that she plays along after like, mortal, I would not do this. This is beneath me.
Yeah.
And then she does it. Just like when Bob kind of flexes.
Yeah.
They like to be included in stuff, I think. It's boring in the coin. It's boring in the skull, right? He tells her that we had an understanding. You don't come out unless I call you. And she says she's respecting that, but she came out just to remind you that my services and resources are at your disposal. And that the whole of herself, currently residing beneath the floor of your laboratory, is likewise prepared to assist you. And Harry says, it's an interesting line where he says, if I knew how to erase you from my mind without getting killed, I'd do it in a heartbeat. And again, she has this like, I don't want to say petulance because she's a fallen fucking angel. Like she's obviously very powerful. And petulance doesn't really fit, but it's, I guess it's not far off though, because she really is pretty impotent without his say so here. But the portion of me that shares your mind is nothing but the shadow of my true self. But have a care, mortal. Second time she's called him that. I exist, and I desire to continue to do so. So yeah, they have an interesting kind of, it basically sums up the relationship, right? That she's going to help Harry not die because she doesn't
want to die.
Yeah, she doesn't want to die or, fall out of existence. And he's going to use her so long as she's very tight to the restrictions. So neither of them's really happy with it, but they kind of, it's the compromise they've kind of come up with.
Kind of an armed neutrality.
Exactly.
Armistice of some sort.
There you go. As she's getting out of there, he threatens to put her in a tiny box. But she says, if black magic is truly rising, you'll need everything you got. And then he starts to describe how awful this box will be. No holes, smelling like a locker room. And she dips. It's interesting. Like she went full bore there, trying to get him to dig up the coin, right? It wasn't piecemeal. And it wasn't a really huge effort, but it is interesting that she brought it up. Again, that could be one of these early chapters just to kind of remind everyone where things stand. But it was interesting based on how we saw her operate in the past. And then he mentions Michael, which every time he comes up in this context, it's heartbreaking because Harry's, best friend, more or less, is a Knight of the Cross. He's one of three. In this case, there's currently 2 active, but there's 3 people in all the world who are entrusted with swords, imbued with nails from the cross, capital C. And so he's basically, his job is to fight the Denarians and help. His real job is to help them repent, but most of them are too far gone. So his his B role is to take them out and make sure they stop hurting other mortals. So Harry's best friend is basically his enemy, which is why he, obviously that isn't a real good description of Michael, but that's kind of how Harry sees the situation. And so he hasn't seen Michael since he picked up this coin. And again, one of the more heartbreaking parts of that is he picked up the coin
to save Michael's child,
to prevent Michael's child from doing the same. His child, named Harry after Harry for saving, because he saved his wife, Charity. They named their kid after him, and Harry, once again, saved him at the cost of his soul.
At the cost of himself. But that's just how he goes. That's the cost of doing business if you're Harry Dresden.
Yeah, I mean,
saving others at the cost of your soul and other bits and bobs.
And he commits the absolute cardinal sin, probably the worst. This is breaking the 8th law of magic. It's the 11th commandment. It's the 2nd golden rule. He says, I was fairly sure that my day couldn't get much worse.
You never say that.
Just
like you never say the Q word or the S word if you work in medicine or law enforcement. Exactly. If you really want to piss off a bunch of nurses when you're on a floor in the ED, just say, gee, sure is quiet around here. You will get death stares from every last one of them.
What's the S word in this scenario?
Slow.
Similar.
Yeah. I had a coworker who used to love to walk into a quiet night shift and be like, wow, sure is slow around here. Can't get much quieter, can it? And it'd just be like, I'm going to throw my shoe at you. Because inevitably it would go to hell. It's the weirdest thing, but it happens.
Generally not very superstitious. I'm a little stitious, right? I guess there's like some habits, I guess. Realistically, like, I don't buy into any of that. But one of my buddies says stuff like that during sports games. And like, I hate it.
Can't get any worse than this?
My buddy Dan, has almost gone to like blows with Scott before over Scott saying stuff like, oh, he's pitching, he's got a no-hitter going. Or like, oh, they're playing really well right now. I can't believe they're beating this team. Like shit like that. Yeah. That's just like, what the are you doing? No, don't say that. Really the only time I do that, but I definitely do it for sports.
Yeah.
But Harry makes this mistake. I also don't say things like, can't get any worse, very often at least. And
it always can.
No sooner had I thought it than there was a horrible crunching sound. My head snapped back hard against the headrest on the back of the driver's seat. The beetle shuddered and jounced wildly, and I fought to keep it under control. You'd think I would know better by now.
And he managed to get a look, and a real battleship of an old Chrysler, dark gray, windows tinted. And then the car slammed into the beetle again and nearly sent me into a deadly spin. My head snapped to one side and hit the window, and I could almost smell the smoldering of my tires as they all slid forward and sideways simultaneously. I felt the car hit a curb and then bounce up. I wrenched the steering wheel and the brakes, my body responding to things my son brain hadn't yet caught up to. I think I kept it from becoming a total disaster because instead of spinning off onto oncoming traffic or hitting the wall at a sharp angle, I managed to slam the beetle's broadside into the building beside the street. Brick grated on steel until I came to a halt 50 feet later. So he's a bit of a mess. After he's sitting there for a moment, he thinks I should get out and make sure everybody's all right. There's no screaming, no corpses in my rear view mirror. Nothing was on fire, which is always good. These are good. He cracks a few Dukes of Hazzards joke, and a cop shows up, a cop he recognized as Grayson. And he talks to him. He got into his car and started asking me questions in a concerned tone of voice. I answered him as best I could, but something between my brain and my mouth had shorted out and found him eyeing me and then looking around the inside of the beetle for open containers before he sat me down on the ground and started routing traffic around me. And then Karen shows up, and he keeps making Dukes of Hazzards jokes. And she says, did you know you have a bruise on the side of your head? Nah. Do I? Harry, seriously, if you're so loopy you can't talk to me, I need to get you to a hospital. Sorry, Murph. Been a long day already. I got my bells rung pretty good. I'll be fine in a minute. And the EMT looks him over and basically says he has a mild concussion and says that he should see a doctor. She keeps to her word and he doesn't get sent to the hospital. And she says, all right, spill. What happened? Someone in a dark gray Chrysler tried to park in my backseat. And no, I didn't get the plates. I was too busy considering a career as a crash test dummy. You've got the dummy part down. You into something lately? Not yet. I mean, hell's bells, Murphy. I got told a half a freaking hour ago that there's bad juju going down somewhere in Chicago. I haven't even had time to start checking into it, and someone is already trying to make me into a commercial for seatbelts and airbags. You sure it was deliberate? Yeah, but whoever it was, he wasn't a pro. Why do you say that? If he had been, he'd have spun me easy. No idea he was there until he'd hit me. Could have bumped me into a spin before I could have straightened out, flipped my car a few times, killed me pretty good. It wasn't exactly the best place for it either. Attack of opportunity. Was that? When you weren't expecting the shot, but you see it and take it before opportunity passes you by. Yeah, probably one of those. And so she offers to take him home, and Grayson mentions the cloak in his back seat that looks like they have blood on it. Costume stuff, cloak and robes and such, had fake blood all over them. It looked cheesy as hell. And Murphy says, you lied to him about the clothes and the blood. And you did it well. I mean, if I didn't know you. It surprises me about you, that's all. You've always been a terrible liar. So what's the real story? Not here. Let's talk in a bit. Harry, what's wrong? The limp, headless body of that nameless young man filled my thoughts. It brought up too many emotions with it, and I felt my throat tighten until I knew I wouldn't be able to speak. So I shook my head a little and shrugged. You going to be all right? I'm always all right, more or less. She calls him a great big girl because one fender bender and he gets emotional and pathetic. She asked, do you know who did this? Not yet, I growled as the wrecker arrived. But you can bet your ass I'm going to find out.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really short chapter.
Yeah, my site has 3 pages or 3 chapters on the same page.
Oh, wow. It must be short.
They get back to his place, and he's already starting to feel a little bit better, or at least a little bit more lucid, which means he can feel the pain and he's feeling worse, but it's probably a good thing. His body, obviously, anytime you're in a car accident, even like really minor ones, it fucks up your body, right? Just the sheer physics of the, 5,000 pounds of metal stopping on a dime and slamming your body around. It is very strange how badly you hurt after just a little like bumper tap the next day, right? And he's already starting to get all those feelings coming through. Maybe that's a wizard thing. You get it right away. It's got to suck after he lifts weight, right?
Slam. So and his head hit the window. So I'm sure he's just fucking in a mess.
That is fair. It's a good thing he made Lashiel put the seatbelt on, right?
Right.
The poor thing would have gone through it.
It is interesting though.
Yeah, you mentioned that. I definitely want to touch on that a little bit later.
Yeah, I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget.
Similar conjurings. He goes with him just to kind of make sure he's okay. And we saw in Deadbeat, Gravane, Cassius, and their zombies broke through Harry's wards and his steel door. So he got a new door put in, but I think he did it himself. And so it's not lined up properly. So you really got to like shove it with all your might to get it scraping open and closed, which is, I guess, more safe than one that opens nice and smoothly. But sometimes you need to run down the steps and get in quickly. So depending on the situation, more or less safe. He redid a bunch of, obviously because of the zombie attack, the house wasn't in shambles necessarily, but there was certainly some stuff needed to be done. So it sounds like he redid a lot of the stuff, new linoleum, new carpet, redid some of the stuff in the bathroom and the door. But he is not an expert. And, Murphy said, I thought you were going to get a contractor to look at it. And he says, when he gets the money. Now he has a new job. So she wonders, like, why are you not getting paid enough by the wardens? What's that about? And again, she mentioned that he wasn't a good liar. And he throws another little white lie in there saying that the council hasn't given a cost of living increase in 50 years. And so he's not making as much money as one would hope. But we find out.
Oh, yeah. Do we make as much money as we would hope?
That is true. Well, maybe. But we do find out that that's another lie, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, again, he goes through, like, he decorates in textures, not colors or styles, which is interesting. I don't think he mentions that exact phrasing, but that's something he said before. And that's why he has tapestries and comfy old couches that don't match and stuff like that.
Same. Comfy couches that don't match. I don't have tapestry, so currently.
And rugs and stuff like that, which makes sense when it's a basement and cold in the winter and stuff like that. But again, he likes the textures, which leans into his neuroatypical, right? Mouse comes up and shakes Murphy's hand, and she says, "When did you teach him that?" He's like, "I didn't." Again, we're seeing Mouse kind of start figuring stuff out.
Oh, yeah. Mouse is a genius.
Harry asks the dog where Thomas is, and he kind of points at the door. And Thomas is in the shower, and he basically comes out of the shower and says, "Hi, bye." And it's clearly a little abrupt. Obviously, there's a little bit more than that, but it is a little bit abrupt, which is certainly something to put a pin in. And Murphy asks about it, and Harry says he wants to talk to him, but Thomas hasn't said anything. So, you want to talk to him, but you're making him talk to you, which is pretty standard stuff, actually. My understanding of how to talk to people. They also go over the kid that the wardens executed. And he explains kind of what I touched on about the fourth law of magic and black magic in general, where Harry says it's one of the first things kids try when they realize they have magic, right? The old Jedi mind trick. And it can be not so bad, but it very quickly progresses to controlling people and having them do things against their will. And, he mentions, a 15-year-old kid can't go 10 seconds without thinking about sex. They can use this power for very nefarious things on that front. The R word, straight up. There's no getting around it. I mean, this is just, at that point, you start, like Lyssy mentioned, almost get into Renfield territory where you start to break down their mind, and they're not the same. And it damages them. It is possible sometimes for them to come back, sometimes, but it most of the time devolves into a total breakdown, and these people are basically dead. And it does some similar damage to your own brain as well. So performing black magic changes you and the victim. And that's an interesting angle. Certainly a high price for this power, which again makes sense. Everything nothing comes for free. And obviously these kids don't realize it. So this kid didn't realize how much he was damaging himself. And that helped spiral him out of control to the point where he was killing people and just basically having thralls and slaves. And he tells Murphy that about the execution, and she obviously gets upset because she's a cop and it's her city. And she says, if there's a body, I can't ignore it. And he's like, there's not going to be a body. Obviously the White Council is smarter than that. But there's a line where it is really interesting how different Harry is, even than maybe even last novel, 2 novels ago, where Murphy asked him if he could have either defended him with magic or physically, or taken him on as his responsibility like Ebb did. But he tells her, like, they're heavyweights there, but he's not sure they're in the wrong. Again, he obviously doesn't love the idea of killing the kid, and he didn't want to see it or be a part of it, but
very conflicted.
Absolutely.
Which I think makes sense.
Yeah. And that's, why we get such a good description of how damaging and dangerous this type of magic is. And again, they take it to the extreme right away. I mean, this dude raped and murdered people. He's not a good dude, and he's too powerful for the mundane justice system. And we haven't heard really of any sort of prison or anything like that for the White Council. So if he can't be rehabilitated and he's this big of a danger, maybe that is the only solution. That's kind of the conversation that Harry's stuck in. And I am adamantly opposed to capital punishment. And, in this situation, obviously it's very imaginary and hypothetical. Like, it's hard to disagree that that's the solution. So I mean, it's challenging my morality, and I'm just a schmo reading the book, which is interesting. And it's the mark of a well put together question, right? And he continues and mentions he got an annoyingly vague letter from the gatekeeper. And she says, "Who's he?" "Wizard. Way mysterious." I just love that description. And that there's more black magic afoot, and he's going to have to look out for it. After that is when Thomas comes through and says, "Hey," but skips out pretty quickly here. He says, "You need a prostate to understand. You're idiots. You should talk to him." Maybe. And he tells her he's going to wait for sundown and put on his wizard hat and start finding out what's going on.
Which is great.
The same wizard hat I have.
Of course.
It's imaginary.
Okay, so Harry makes a phone call. He calls Fix, who is the summer knight. And acts a little differently, but also is concerned about the security of the line they're speaking on. And Harry says, come on, man, no one can monitor the phone line with a spell. It'd burn out in a second. Someone isn't playing by the old rules anymore, Harry, and a phone tap is not a difficult thing to engineer. So they make a plan to meet at accorded neutral territory, Ant, at Mac's pub the next day about lunchtime. He makes a few more phone calls to see if anybody else has heard anything, and no one's heard a thing, but he warns them to keep an ear to the ground. I even put in a call to the archive, but all I got was an answering service, and no one returned my call. I hadn't called Michael or Father Forthill. I probably should have, working on the basic notion that more help was better help. Then again, if the Home Office wanted Michael on the case, he'd be there regardless of whether or not anyone called him and how many immovable objects stood in the way. I've seen it happen often enough to trust that it was true. It was a good rationalization, but it wasn't fooling anyone. Not even me. The truth was that I didn't want to talk to either of them, unless I really, really had to. He heads down into the lab, and we learn that Harry has entered his villain era, and he has a exacting map of the city of Chicago on his table, and that is where the funds from his warden paycheck have gone. He has perfect reproductions in pewter of different buildings, and each of these has a piece of that actual building, tree, whatever, asphalt even. And we learn that, well, he said, it's a tiny model of the city down here in my basement laboratory. Sort of projects more of that evil, psychotic Lex Luthor vibe than I'd like, Bob said. None of the evil geniuses I've ever worked for could have handled like this. Though I guess some of the psychotics could have, which I love. If that's meant to be flattering, you need some practice. And so Bob says that the model of the museum really altered the flow around the stadium into something mostly accurate, speaking thaumaturgically. Little Chicago might be able to handle something if you want to give it a test run. Tell me this doesn't have something to do with the bruises on your face. I'm not sure it does, but I got word today that the gatekeeper, Bob shivered, thinks that there's black magic afoot in town and that I need to do something about it. And you want to try to use Little Chicago to find it? Maybe. Do you think it will work? And he makes a comparison of the Wright brothers with Kitty Hawk, Grand Canyon. And he says, oh, good, Harry. How dangerous could it be? You don't say shit like that. We've already learned this. And Bob says, you've been pouring energy into this thing every night for 6 months, Harry. And right now it's holding about 3 times the amount of energy that kinetic ring you wear will contain. And that's a lot. That's a lot of energy. That could do bad things. And Bob says, yes, and you haven't tested it yet. If you've screwed up some of the harmonics, it could blow up in your face, worst case scenario. Best case, you only blow out the project, but you set yourself back to ground zero. To square one, I corrected him. Square one is the beginning of a project. Ground zero is the area immediately under a bomb blast. One may tend to resemble the other. So Harry's got Bob a few romance novels to kind of con him into working here. He has put me in the lake. He puts him in the part of the table that represented Lake Michigan. And do you know what kind of black magic? No clue, just black. Vague, yet unhelpful. Annoyingly so. Oh, the gatekeeper didn't do it to annoy you. He did it to prevent any chance of paradox. He what? He got this from hindsight. He had to. Hindsight? You mean he went to the future for this? Well, that would break one of the laws of magic, so probably not. But he might have sent himself a message from there, or gotten it from some kind of prognosticating spirit. He might even have developed some ability for that himself. Some wizards do. Meaning what? Meaning that it's possible nothing has happened yet, but that he wanted to put you on your guard against something that's coming in the immediate future. Why not just tell me? You just don't get this, do you? I guess not. Okay, let's say he finds out someone is going to steal your car tomorrow. Huh, I said bitterly. Okay, let's say that. Right, well, he can't just call you up and tell you to move your car. Why not? Because if he significantly altered what happened with his knowledge of the future, it could cause all sorts of temporal instabilities. It could cause a new parallel realities to split off from the point of the alteration, ripple out into multiple alterations he couldn't predict, or kind of backlash into his consciousness and drive him insane. Which, might not do much to deter you, but other wizards take that kind of thing seriously. Thank you, Bob. But I still don't get why any of those things happen. Okay, Temporal Studies 101. Let's say that he hears your car is being stolen. He comes back to warn you, and as a result, you keep your car. Sounds good so far. But if your car never got stolen, then how did he know to come back and warn you? I frowned. That's the paradox, and it can have all kinds of nasty backlash. Theory holds that it could even destroy our reality if it happened in a weak enough spot. But that's never been proven and never happened. You can tell on account of how everything keeps existing. Okay, so what's the point in sending the message at all if he can't change anything? Oh, it can. If it's done subtly enough, indirectly enough, you can get all kinds of things changed. Like, for example, he tells you your car is going to be stolen, so you move it to a parking garage, where instead of getting stolen by a junkie who is going to shoot you and take the car on the street, you get jacked by a professional who takes the car without hurting you, because by slightly altering the fate of the car, he indirectly alters yours. That's a pretty fine line. Yes, which is why not mucking around with time is one of the laws. It's possible to change the past, but you have to do it indirectly, and if you screw it up, you run the risk of Paradoxgeddon. So what you're saying is that by sending me this warning, he's indirectly working some other angle completely. I'm saying that the gatekeeper is usually a hell of a lot more specific about this kind of thing. All of the senior council take black magic seriously. There's got to be a reason he's throwing it at you like this. My gut says he's working from a temporal angle. You don't have any guts. Your jealousy of my intellect is an ugly, ugly thing, Harry. Get to the point. Right, boss. The point is that black magic is very hard to find when you look for it directly. If you try to bring up instances of black magic on your model, like Little Chicago is some kind of evil juju radar array, it's probably going to blow up in your face. The gatekeeper put me on guard against black magic, but maybe he's telling me that so I can watch for something else, something black magic related, which might be a lot easier to find with your model. So instead of looking for black magic, we look for the things that go along with black magic. Bingo. And the more normal, the better. So there's a lot of shit going on here. So they can start looking for pain, for blood, for the things associated with black magic, including fear. And he says, do you think Little Chicago could handle that? Maybe one of them. But this will be a very difficult, long, and very dangerous spell for you, Harry. You're good for your years, but you still don't have that kind of fine control you'll get as you age. It's going to take all your focus, and it will take a lot out of you, assuming you can manage it at all. So he says, well, fine, we'll treat it as a full-blown ritual. Even if you did everything right, it might not work. And if Little Chicago turns out to be flawed, it could be very bad for you. So odds are good that he was the only one who could actively find and counter someone before he got the murder ball rolling, which I love that phrase. He was also presumably the only one who was forewarned. And, he says maybe it's better to slow it down. He could get reports from his friends. He could get more information on the threat. He could do more work on the spell. And he says, was it worth as much as my life to try this spell when patients would get me information that was almost as good? It might not be worth my life, but it would probably cost someone else's. Black magic isn't the kind of thing that leaves people whole behind it, and sometimes the victims it kills are the lucky ones. If I didn't employ the model, I'd have to wait for the bad guys to make the first move. So I had to do it. So they start talking about putting together the spell and lay out a ritual. And they'll start looking for fear when the sun goes down. I started back up my ladder before I thought too much about it and changed my mind. Well, gosh, golly gee.
Again, if we point out every time Harry risks his life, or his, we'll run out of things to do, but other things to talk about on the podcast. But it is just so very much what he does, right?
100%.
Good stuff. And anything real quick on that chapter? We'll get back to the beginning and do some analysis here.
I don't. It is interesting that temporal devices, hindsight, and things like that, and the alternate paradoxes, which actually got me thinking. So wait, I do have something to say. This just popped into my head. Alternate paradoxes. It kind of made me a little curious about Dream Harry. Kind of because he could see more, he knows more, and it's almost like, does he have hindsight? Does that inner workings of his mind kind of have that alternate paradox? It's just a thought, just throwing it out there.
Harry or the gatekeeper?
Harry, the Harry in his head.
Oh, interesting.
Because remember, he's better, he's more clean cut, he's more put together, he knows more. about things. Just a thought.
Takes care of himself, certainly.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because he knows things.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that version of him probably makes different choices in those
Yeah.
situations, right?
And I mean, it's just it was just something that kind of like, it's nothing that like hard and fast sort of thing, but it is an idea.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I don't want to get too much into other things, but we are going to see more of that version of Harry. Ready to go analysis back to chapter 1?
Yeah.
All right. Again, obviously that's the first 6 chapters and they're relatively short. So not a ton happened, not super explosive or too crazy, but again, very solid exposition, great butcherisms, some, funny lines in there, and Bob is great. And Murphy's back, which is nice, just
Yay.
adding that at the expense of Thomas, maybe. Any thoughts there on chapter 1?
I do appreciate Ebenezer's trust in Harry, as well as the gatekeeper pursuing Harry's assistance in this matter of black magic in Chicago.
Mhm.
I feel like, because when we last saw the gatekeeper and, the voting to keep Harry in and all of that, and the gatekeeper was like, I'm going to abstain. I don't know yet. He knows now. He knows.
Yeah.
He knows now.
Yeah, I mean, he said it when he found Harry in the tree in the Never Never, right?
Yeah.
Hanging from the tree after he.
But this
had
is actions over words. He proves it.
But what I'm saying is that he asked Harry, he's like, well, you've done your job. You can back away now. And Harry, says, obviously I can't do that. That's not who I am or what I do. And the gatekeeper said, like, had you agreed to walk away, I would have killed you myself, because my vote would have done the same thing anyway. But I think because he passed that test and that whole novel in Summer Night, the gatekeeper believes in him enough to send him this message, right? All those wizards are in Chicago, and he had to know that, because why else would he have given Ebb the letter, right?
Yeah.
So he chose Harry for a reason, and it does show a level of trust and
100%.
But
it also shows not just trust, but he believes in him, because he's the only one who got this information. He believes in him that he will handle this, that and he didn't give him a lot of detail, didn't give him a lot of information. And we learned why from Bob, but he gave him that information because he trusted him, and I think he trusted in Harry's determination and the way Harry is. And I feel like that's really important.
Mule-headed inability to
He won't give
not
up.
save people and not and to quit. Yeah.
And but we know that to be Harry. We know that to be Harry's core trait, I guess you could say. Because it's true. I mean, that is what Harry does. Harry is balls to the wall. He might break rules a little here and there to get the results he needs, but he's not going to give up. He's not going to stop until the problem is solved. And we see that in all of these books over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases we've seen it come out almost as a flaw, but it's his defining characteristic that he will not stop when he has an opportunity to save people. And it's
important.
And I liked that we finally saw, when he was, at Cassius's mercy, we saw him use that same stubbornness and energy on himself.
Yeah.
Right? Where he decided he wasn't going to die. There was no one else to save there, but it was like, fuck this. I'm not going to let this guy kill me. He's
100%.
I think that is just a small, showing, maybe Lash yell, but I think really it's just showing that he's starting to, like, slowly but surely come around to believe that he's
worth it.
Worth it. Yeah, exactly.
Well, and it's also, it highlights his determination. And in that moment with Cassius, we saw not only his determination to save others, but to save himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that is very impactful and really important.
For sure.
Because he has all of this power, but he doesn't really have faith in his own power.
Yeah, and we've seen how powerful faith can be, right? Even Charity, who has been able to use her faith, and that's something that's really held Harry back.
But we also learned that even though Harry doesn't always have the greatest of faith in himself, he still succeeds because of that determination.
Mm-hmm. And his faith in the people around him.
Oh, yes, definitely.
And that the world can be a good place, which again is why the issue with Ebenezer is so painful and hurtful and so hard for him to get through.
Oh, definitely. And that is a big glaring, almost, can't think of the word, like, not necessarily like a social issue, but like that it's a big glaring issue in the world of Harry, in Harry's mind and Harry's existence.
Mm-hmm.
And because that he doesn't know how much he can trust Ebenezer because he's lied to him.
Yeah, and we know how hard it was for him to trust people. Going obviously, this goes back to the orphanage and everything with Justin, being betrayed by this man who finally had a dad again and a home and a place and a lady friend and all, like a life.
And he was
betrayed. And so like we could see that permeating the first few novels, that he doesn't trust. And as he does start to trust and, have faith in the people around him, that's
he learns
when
this.
And he's also become more powerful. We've talked about that. Like his friends make him mighty just by being there, but also, the positive energy and his ability to like soldier on when things are dark because of the alphas and Murphy and Thomas and Butter, right? We saw how powerful Butter's friendship was last novel. Not just the physical successful rescues, which were obviously very important, but
of course
his energy and his growth and his willingness to stand by Harry and fight was hugely important, I think, to his ability to continue to get through it and fight and eventually come back to the fire and growth.
Well, and I think with the Butters thing where it was it was basically the proof is in the pudding that Harry is just as important to Butters as Butters is to Harry. That same risks, all those risks he took are the same risks Harry would take. And I feel like that probably had a greater impact.
I definitely think that like Butters needed a friend also, so I think there was a lot to it.
Oh, definitely.
But yeah, no, it was like right place, right time, and like literally in a couple instances, right?
Exactly.
I mentioned I had copy pasted a line because I really wanted to touch on it, and then you said that same line, which is great because it just means we're thinking the same thing. I guess maybe that isn't great for a 2-person podcast. We shouldn't.
But we're thinking along the same lines.
Listen to Joshi and Lyssy agree on everything for 27 novels. No, we definitely haven't. But yeah, like just the import there of like, that the laws exist for a reason. We kind of have seen that. We haven't really seen how all of the laws impact you, right? We know now how mind control magic does.
Yeah.
But they must stand as written. That line popped for me too.
Oh, yeah. Especially because I mentioned that I literally said it's the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law, when he reanimated Sue. Like, we literally had that conversation last week.
Oh, absolutely. But it's interesting.
I thought that was just great.
It's interesting that some of these laws as written are like flowery and kind of esoteric, right? Like, it's not don't do time travel. It's thou shalt not swim against the currents of time. It's not don't perform necromancy. It's thou shalt not reach beyond the borders of life. In this case, our dead warlock thou shalt not invade the mind of another, or thou shalt not enthrall another. Those are the third and fourth laws. Sounds like the ones he broke. But they must stand as written is really interesting. Like there's no changing, there's no growth, there's no understanding. That definitely popped out for me as well, and I like that it did for you as well.
It's it's again phrasing. We talk about phrasing.
Are we still doing phrasing?
But you're so good at the way he phrases things, the capitalizations, the honorifics, and things like that. We talk about that shit all the fucking time because it's important. Those are their elements that aren't just storytelling elements that are important, but they're story elements that are important. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's one of this is basically a Dresden and Buffy podcast at this point.
Yeah, but 100%.
One of the things I loved about the talent of the creator of that series that unfortunately it came along with some negatives, it sounds like. Douchebaggery.
Yes.
Abuse.
100%.
But one of his real talents was he would do not necessarily gimmick episodes, but like gimmick episodes, right? There was a musical episode, there was a silent episode. Like he would do these like weird scenarios. You know, he put the characters in an interesting scenario. And in a lot of shows, it's easy to do that. That's the point of that episode, right?
Yeah.
But he would weave in these ridiculous situations with like massive plot implication, series changing moments
where they were more than a gimmick. They had gimmick elements, but they still moved the story along.
I mean, he basically like turned the gimmick on its head and like used it as a plot device to tell big important stories,
which is great
in the world, which is really great. And that's similar to like some of this wordplay and stuff. It feels like with Butcher, where like he takes these little things and I guarantee he's chuckling about how we'll interpret some of these things.
Oh yeah,
and like playing on these honorifics and stuff. They do all matter, and it just seems like some funny, you know, like playing along with the Fae lore, and they seem to all be very important going through here. But yeah, no, very good stuff. We get a mention of the Venatori Umbrorum and the Fellowship of St. Giles. We've met a couple of members of the Fellowship of St. Giles before. I don't think they've mentioned the Venatori before, or maybe they in passing.
I thought they'd mentioned something about it in passing, but I couldn't recall exactly. That's why I kind of like, well, maybe.
Yeah, I feel like they have mentioned them. Sorry, I just don't want to like spoil stuff, but like, oh yeah, no, he did mention them because I remember.
Okay,
I mentioned Cthulhu on this very podcast, so they're connected with, not in a like they're in cahoots with, but they have some connection with the old ones and beings outside that their primary objective is, and that's really all we know about them at this point. And mysterious, but they're good guys is all we know, or at least allies, as are the Fellowship of St. Giles, who are mostly the half-turned Red Court vampires. You touched on it, but Mab not meeting that disrespect with violence is very interesting.
Sketch. Very sketch.
Yeah, what is she in league with the vampires? You know, it didn't sound like they were going to be before. What is something happening that she needs her? Like, what's going on is basically.
Yeah.
And Summer mobilized troops, but didn't do anything.
Which is also sketch.
Inimical? I contextualized it.
Yeah, 100%.
But there's our SAT word for the day. Turn the calendar. Just a good word. Ebenezer and Murphy, he mentions, you know, how powerful Ebenezer must be to notice that he's got Lash inside him, right? Because Murphy also recognizes that something's off.
But we also know how powerful Murphy is in her own right.
Oh, sure, but he doesn't think of her as this powerful creature because of that, which is just pops, and it's certainly, I don't want to say necessarily, I mean, it is, right? I mean, it's very much because of what is swinging.
But I think it's because she doesn't have magic. I don't think it's anything other than the fact that she doesn't have magic. And so he doesn't think of it like that.
All right, maybe. But either way, like the two closest people to him, and then Billy as well, all recognize he's not well.
Yeah, 100%.
So like we talked about this last novel, how off he was as far like the book was off. Like the narration was different than this one and different than book 6, right? Like it was off, and it was intentional for sure. We talked, you know, because Lashiel was playing tricks. She's not necessarily at the controls right now, but that we know of at least.
Right.
But Ebenezer noticed, Murphy noticed, and Billy noticed. So I just think that's really interesting that he's not even wielding the coin, and they already noticed that Lashiel's shadow is on him, which tells us either how powerful she is, how closely they pay attention to Harry, how well they know him, how good of friends they are, even though she doesn't tell him happy birthday, or just that she's bananas powerful, that even this tiny shadow of her can change him so quickly and so completely. Or not completely, but manifestly, significantly. Yeah. That conversation about Michael and how he's like has to be separate from him. And it kind of touched on in my brain something that you mentioned earlier in your chapter, maybe it was in my chapter, about how he's been an outsider, and like he's been an outsider always, right? His parents died. He was in an orphanage, and then he was on the run, and then he was this black sheep, and now he goes on talk shows and gets ridiculed. He's a psychic consultant. Nobody takes him seriously. So he's an outsider in the mundane world, obviously in the wizard world, and now with his friends Michael, he's separated from. And I think that's part of the Kincaid thing. Beyond him being overly jealous, he's also worried about losing Murphy too.
Oh,
right?
100%. 100%.
But he's always been this outsider, and so like it makes that Michael situation hurt all the more for sure.
Most definitely.
That's all I have on that one. Anything on the car accident? Or that
yes.
chapter?
So, in the last book we saw, there were a couple of moments where he thought things and then other people said them.
Mm-hmm.
He made Lashiel put on her seatbelt moments before a massive car accident.
Yeah, and let's recap that real quick, just because it was a couple weeks ago. You want to do that?
So there were a couple instances once where he was meeting with the wardens, where he said, you don't get to become Merlin by collecting bottle caps. And moments later, I believe it was Rodriguez said the same thing.
But Harry said it in his brain.
In his
head.
He
said it to us.
He said it in his narration. And the other one was he was in a conversation with Billy and said, would you really know if you were crazy if you were? And then Gravane says it. Was it Gravane who says it?
It was Cowell.
It was Cowell. So Cowell said it. So we have these two moments.
Well, there's another one also where he said, I wish I had my gun.
And then his gun kind of
and then Billy walked up with the gun moments later. So yeah, it's conjuring things.
Yes. And that was sort of what I kind of felt like this, where he was protecting her from something he didn't know was going to happen. And even though she's not a corporeal body, he still did it. And so that was something that jumped out to me like a ton of bricks. Though tons of bricks don't jump, I guess. But it was something that was very obvious to me. I was like, oh shit, we're doing this again, is basically what I thought. And I had a couple of thoughts on this. I actually text Josh while I was listening to all this. Couple things. Could these be temporal paradoxes?
Well, they can't be paradoxes, right? Because paradoxes destroy the world, right?
Could there be impacts of a paradox, I guess? But the paradox could destroy the world. Not that they do, but that they could. And the other thing I said was, is the gatekeeper violating that law? The law of swimming against the
currents,
rivers of time,
currents
or water
of time.
Currents. There were currents of time. I knew it was water related. And so that was very much a
time is a river, life is a journey, the door is ajar.
There you go. These are just different kind of things that sort of piqued my interest, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
My other thought, I don't know if I texted you this one. Perhaps it's Lashiel doing this.
Yeah, that's what some of the readers have said. Eliza and Dragonfed among them. One or two other ones as well. But like it somehow she's got the force. I mean, she is very powerful, and we don't actually know how much power angels have, right? There's a reason.
And her in particular either.
Yeah, for sure, right? And what her powers, set of powers are. We don't really know, right?
No, we don't.
There's a reason why when I pronounce her name, I always stress the last syllable, because that is denoting her as an angel. And like, we don't know. Presumably the white god has a pretty big bag of tricks.
Yeah.
And his crew have to have some significant level of power for it to have been a big deal for her and the other 29 plus one. For the other 30 to fall, it wouldn't have been a big deal if she didn't have some, super crazy power, right? If 30 janitors leave, it's like, well, we're going to have stacks of trash for a little bit, but we'll get through this, even if the vice principal leaves, right?
Yeah.
But this is a big problem because they are crazy powerful. We've seen what the other Denarians can do, and we haven't really seen anything about her power. We just know she's the temptress, the web weaver, according to, her enemies.
Yeah.
But does she have some level of foresight? Yeah, no, that's a good question. It is very interesting because this is now the fourth time, and I didn't connect this one to that. But as soon as you know,
Instantly.
as soon as you like started talking about it, I like finished your sentence in my brain. I was just a little slower than you, a lot slower. But yeah, no, like I love that because it really does feel that way. Like it's A to B and
why
it's bang
would he do
bang.
that? He's never ordered anybody who got in his car to put on a seatbelt.
Yeah, it's never come. I don't even think they may have mentioned it, but it's not ever been a point of emphasis for sure.
Not at all.
Interesting.
So something is sending him, it feels like something is sending him messages on that temporal plane. And that's literally what this is the text I sent Josh. And it said, he asked Lash to put on a seatbelt right before the second car accident, question mark. Is Gatekeeper sending him messages messing with the temporal plane, as Bob called it? And I said, could the Gatekeeper be the turncoat? Is there more that he knows because of breaking that law? Because Bob said the one thing, and I emphasized it when I was reading it, that would break one of the laws. So probably not. So that, because that probably is.
It's certainly pregnant.
It's very much there because Bob is usually yes or no. Like he's, Bob is informative, and this is a slightly speculative.
Mhm.
Probably not, most likely not, but it's not no. It's not 100% no.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Because, and the concept of hindsight, in order to see hindsight, you have to be in front of it or be beyond it.
Yeah, no, for sure.
So that was the other thing, that he got this from hindsight. He had to. So there's a lot of like.
Well, and Bob does break down how you can do that, right, without breaking the law. So it is, but you're right. That is he speculates that the Gatekeeper isn't breaking the laws.
Yeah. And, he says that he might have sent a message from himself, or there was some kind of prognosticating spirit. He might even have developed some ability for that himself. So,
yeah, well, there are also like, there like soothsayer type magic does exist in universe. So like there are people who can see a little ways into the future.
Yeah.
But we haven't
met a soothsayer.
We have not. And we don't know anything about the Gatekeeper really, which is
great.
Great.
I mean, it's
it's very
fantastic. He's a fantastic character that we don't know shit about, and it's fabulous. Absolutely.
He better not be Cal.
I don't think he is because they have different.
I don't
accents.
either. I don't either, but
because Cal's not tall enough. Wasn't the Gatekeeper very, very tall, and Cal was just slightly taller than Harry? I'm stuck on height. Okay.
No. It actually it matters, right?
It does.
Yeah, I have a theory that it's Carlos.
Cal is?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Just like somebody that would hurt. Jim likes to break Harry in half. It's like his fun stuff to do.
Oh, that's right. Because in the big twirly circle, Cal and Rodriguez weren't in the same place at the same time, were they?
Well, he got blasted out real quick.
Yeah, at the Deathly Hollow. What is it? Dark Hollow. Deathly Dark, whatever.
The Deathly Hollows.
I know, Harry, you're a wizard.
You're a warden, Harry. No, I just just try to think of like who it could be that would just be the worst.
Yeah.
That's the only reason why that's it. That literally that's not spoiler. There's no evidence of that. It's just me trying to make Harry's life miserable. Just
100%.
I really don't. I mean, if it's a spoiler, I'm just fucking pulling it out of my ass. That is one of the things is like, we're going to, every single new character, every single character that talks is, I at least am going to think, oh, is that Cal? Is that Cal?
Yeah.
Is that Kumori?
Yeah.
Just because, again, you don't have two characters who are white and know a little bit about the White Council and might be in it, cover their faces the whole novel without
at the same time that there's a traitor amongst them.
Exactly. Yeah. Shit's going down.
Yes. I mean, there's just a lot of interesting stuff.
Absolutely. Sorry. I just got that thought and then got worried. But I do like there really is no evidence that the Gatekeeper isn't breaking the laws at this point. Interesting.
Probably. I have, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but with all of these crackpot theories, I'm like, hey,
this is exactly what I want. I want you to just get like so tinfoily.
Bad guy.
And eventually you're gonna solve the novels by saying something ridiculous.
I have been right about a couple things which have blown my freaking mind.
Mister is the time traveling Merlin.
That would be amazing.
That's why he lost his tail in the currents of time.
There we go. Got stuck between a rock and a hard place.
And that solves the whole novel.
It really does.
All you got is rocks in hard places.
Everything is rocks in hard places. Okay, and then after the car accident, this is again just me. So Harry, he says when he gets back to the house, he's feeling a little bit better. Harry feeling better so quickly. Do we think this could be part of Butter's theory of regeneration? Why he felt so much better so quickly?
It's kind of hinting at during the chapter.
Okay.
Because like
that.
Well, no, just because like I mentioned that like the next day is when I feel like just like broken, but maybe he's getting through it quicker. He also has some pressures in his mind that can speed things up as well.
I just, because it was 20 minutes later and he's not feeling as horrible, which is impressive. But there's just that was one of the things, like literally I have little note cards that the two ways I take notes right now are I text you things,
which I love.
And as we're going back through it, I highlight things, but I mostly write them on note cards. I have like a huge box of note cards. That's why sometimes you hear me scooching over here. But that was one of the things where I was like, I wonder. It's like my brain, when I sit in my little office space where we record, my brain thinks of all of these ridiculous, crazy off the wall things and like, but wait, there's more. And the other thing that I don't know if it will come into play, but it piqued my interest was the wrinkled carpet in front of the door.
I think that's just because the door is like,
it's so tight,
hard to move.
But I mean, it was just something that was an odd thing.
Yeah, Thomas doesn't strike me as somebody that would fix stuff like that.
No,
when he comes in, so it could have been that. But yeah, no, there aren't very many things that like it's certainly not chic or anything like that, but it is pretty orderly at least.
Yes, and it's just I think that would be something you'd trip over. The other thing I loved about the description of his apartment after the zombies was that my original Star Wars poster had survived.
Yeah, very important.
These are the important things in life, people.
I just want to touch on when he said after the accident, he said he got my bells rung pretty good, but that was definitely like I've mentioned this before, how different head injuries and any contact to the head is treated nowadays versus even 30 years ago when I was playing, 20 years ago when I was playing. I got my bell rung all the time. You get kneed in the face, just like, oh, give me some water, give me a second. I'm good.
Yeah, elbow in the head.
Yeah, I mean, it happens. Water polo is a contact sport. You're swimming next to people. You get cracked. Sometimes you do the cracking. Sometimes you are the crack.
You are the cracky.
But I very much got a concussion multiple times and kept going. Not like 20 or not like maybe this is why it explains some things to you guys, right? But no, like there are times when I never blacked out, but like definitely grayed out and like, whoa, okay, give me a second, and I'm good. And just went back in. And it wasn't like an abusive coach or like, it was just literally it wasn't something we really worried about. I've also had diagnosed concussions. So they did exist, but like in sports, you didn't automatically go there. Whereas now you'll like stop everything when someone gets hit in the head, just overly safe, which is great and very important. But it's just that phrasing. He mentioned that he tried out for the football team in high school. That's probably terminology they use for sure. When you got a mild concussion, you just got your bell rung. Get back up, get in there.
Like I played goalie. So like the number of elbows I took to the head, the number of like full on shots I took to the head and the face. And it was just like, in retrospect, might be one of the causes of my migraines.
Interesting too.
But it's just that, but you're right. It's a very different, the way that they're handled now, the way any brain injury is handled now is very, very different.
In a very good way, for sure.
100%. 100%. We are perfect examples of why it was necessary. But yeah, it's, it is that I do appreciate that. But also how Murphy didn't just brush it off, and it was, oh, I just got my bell rung, I'll be fine in a second. And she helped him in a way that was appropriate for him, because she promised he wouldn't have to go to the hospital. And I just really like that. I like their interactions more and more. And she's very observant, and she's less and less by the book. She is spirit versus letter. She's leaning more towards spirit.
Yeah, which is both interesting because of the conversations we've had about how
Yeah.
important letter of the law is to the supernatural world.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a lot of gray area we can work with, and it is a really huge like progression for her character, almost more than is reasonable. It's butting up against that in my mind, that she would be okay with this at this point, even understanding how bad it is, that how damaged this person was.
So, combination of her reasonableness, her exposure to her father's experiences working for the black hats or whatever they were called.
Black cats.
Black cats. One letter off. And the things that she has witnessed.
Black hats are bad guys.
Yeah, that's true. And the things that she has witnessed, the combination of those life experiences, it does make sense, because she is an analyze and act person, quickly analyze. And she has analyzed the situation, that there is more out there than she could possibly know. And sometimes you have to do what is right in a different way.
So she's definitely convinced herself that sometimes people are too far gone.
Yeah.
With her having killed the Renfield.
100%.
Right. So she's definitely had to rationalize this for herself. And I don't even mean that necessarily in a bad way, but like she's had to come to this understanding for sure.
Yeah.
For her own well-being. So I guess it does actually fit there. Good point. I mentioned this before in Stormfront when I said that Susan worked for the Midwestern Arcane, but the text said she worked for the Chicago Arcane.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas here he mentions that
it's shifted over.
Midwestern. Like I said, they got bought out by Big Arcane. It's probably owned by the Sinclair Company or something like that. So one of these big arcane groups is going around buying all the local arcane newspapers probably, but it is now called the Midwestern Arcane.
Uh-huh.
And
in text.
And McAnally's Pub is now referred to as accorded neutral territory.
But there's a sign in McAnally's Pub that Harry saw before the warden's meeting, where it said accorded neutral territory. So
sure, but in Death Masks, it was accorded neutral ground.
Ah, gotcha.
So again, those are both. I mentioned this. I joked about the Chicago Arcane being bought out, but that is actually, you can just hand wave it. But it was just early novel wonkiness, right?
Yeah.
Trying to sort things out. And accorded neutral territory sounds better than accorded neutral ground. But yeah, minor continuity issues there. But again, nothing major, but just fun to recognize and catch these things. I think that was my last one. That's what I got. Anything else on analysis?
I do kind of love Harry's little villain table.
His little Chicago, yeah, it's really cool, huh?
Yeah, it's pretty great.
I would love to see, again, something I'd love to see in live action.
Oh, 100%. Sure. It'd be cool.
Yikes.
Do you have anything on the yikes front?
I mean, more like you have to have a prostate to understand, and one little fender bender, and you are acting like a girl. But that's just kind of, it's not so yikesy as it is just cliche.
Yeah, I mean, he mentions, very cliche. That's a good description. He mentions that Murphy's been playing in what amounted to a boys only league. So she has to have this tough as nails aura that makes her seem, super formidable. I do like the line where he says that made her seem almost as formidable as she actually was. He does really give her credit there.
Oh, yeah.
I mistakenly said he didn't. And it was in a very different way than he gave Ebenezer credit. But it was not, that's not in a feminine way. So you're right. I rescind my knee-jerk garbage, my knee-jerk reaction from earlier. But he definitely, coming back here, I was trying to find the exact quote and compare them. And it really is like, I actually, if Lyssy steals one of mine, you're going to hear that whole line.
Awesome.
So good stuff. Yeah, no, I mean, it was pretty good. Again, like stuff like that. Murphy and Harry's relationship was a huge part of the male gaze issues, and him taking away the agency of Murphy early on was a huge part of the problem on that front. And we almost don't have a yikes section most weeks now because their relationship has progressed to a point where he trusts her and he appreciates her, and he sees her strength and her power, which,
and he relies on her strength
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think you should give people agency and credit and their person and space and ability to exist without needing them for something and without seeing them kick bad guys in the chest, but like baby steps.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, their relationship has just evolved and I'm here for it.
Yeah, no, it's great. And it's one of the really cool things to see in kind of slow motion. Because yeah, I used to have these on audiobook and just kind of chew through them.
Mm-hmm.
I still do it on audiobook as well as as reading now, but I got through this like 3.5 times because it's such a short section, right? I just once I hit chapter 7, I was like, oh no, start again.
Stop.
And it's going through it in slow motion. You really do see that relationship is way more earned than I thought it was.
That's awesome.
And that was a huge part of why, you know, again, coming into this, I mentioned I was not afraid to say early on that like I wasn't a big Murphy fan. And like
You're welcome.
I'm a much bigger fan of hers now because it does really feel like a lot of this progress is earned and this development it's earned. It makes sense in the text and it's gone through baby steps and they've had bumps and stuff, but they really are good friends who, except on their birthdays, take care of each other and show up for each other. That really bugs me. All right. What do you got for quotes of the week?
All right. Let me open up my little Kindle app notebook. Okay. This is a Ebenezer quote. You've got rocks and hard places, boy. Not much else.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great description of it, too.
Oh, awesome.
And also, sometimes I get tired of being the guy who's supposed to deal with undeal-withable situations.
That's such a good one.
And no, I didn't get the plates. I was too busy considering a career as a crash test dummy. Got the dummy part down. And the new door was arguably even more secure than the old one. Now you could barely get the damn thing open even when it wasn't locked.
Love it.
That's what I got.
Although a huge part of him and Butters not dying last time was Thomas, open the door.
Exactly.
Okay. You did steal one of mine, so we are going to go back to that Murphy. No, that's why we have backups. The first line is that the blood doesn't stain a warden's cloak.
Uh-huh.
First line of the novel. And then later when Murphy is washing it off for him, she says, look at this. The blood came out when it hit the water all by itself. It's like that kid never died. Cool, I said quietly. Which is obviously him being just kind of flippant and like trying to be cool in the moment.
Good reason. He's just...
But also, that's probably why they're presumably enchanted to do that.
Yeah.
Because
they have to be.
For their wardens, not mental health, but for their soldier ability.
Yeah.
They need to be good little soldiers. So they can't see blood and like have meltdowns. They need to wipe it off and move on to the next task, right?
100%.
After he tells Ebenezer that he's playing the guitar, he says, good. Exercise is good for the body, but music is good for the soul. Not the way I play it. I'm going to read this back. Again, it's not feminine, but it's not giving her credit because, you know, it's not a gendered compliment. You know, it's just talking about who she is and her innate strength. And again, you don't need to gender things unnecessarily. Sometimes you do. Sometimes it's important, right? But you know, her recognizing that something's wrong and caring about him isn't, right? It's just a human being caring for a human being, which I like. There was a peculiar gentleness in her voice. Murphy had been playing in what amounted to a boys-only league in her work with CPD, and she put off a tough-as-nails aura that made her seem almost as formidable as she actually was. That exterior almost never varied, at least out in the open, with other police officers nearby. But as she looked at me, there was a quiet, definite, and unashamed vulnerability in her voice. Yeah, that vulnerability is like super important to gaining trust and caring, friendship and stuff. And like, that's something we've seen both of them open up with each other, which is great. So I read that twice in 30 seconds on here, but it just really is. I wanted to get that whole thing in here because Lyssy stole my rocket heart place, which I knew you were going to. 'Cause too good, and you not the way you reacted during the breakdown.
Yeah,
very clear you were going to. I was just hoping you had too many good ones. Good stuff. Good stuff. It was a short section, but definitely some good stuff, like I mentioned. And we're going to do 6 chapters again next week, but we cannot get out of here, Liz. The podcast won't let me stop recording. It's going to do it all night if you don't get us. Crackpot Theory of the Week.
Crackpot Theory of the Week. Okay. I mean, I had my mild crackpot theories that, you know, gatekeeper, blah, 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 blah. We talked about that. But my biggest crackpot theory is still that is about Mouse. He's teaching himself tricks.
Uh-huh.
He's telling Harry where fucking Thomas is. He's like got some fae. Maybe he's a wild one. Don't know. But he's got something going on there. He's more than meets the eye. He's a transformer.
Transform and
100%.
roll out onto a new
100%
episode.
Mouse is rad.
All we need now is a little bit of energon and a lot of luck. It's from the Transformers, the movie. Where one character says, "Oh shit, what are we gonna do?" For completely inexplicably in a children's movie,
I love it.
which is wonderful. Very good stuff. Heartbreaking. No spoilers on that one, but it is a heartbreaking movie. They wanted to sell some new toys, so they blew up some continuity stuff. Great music in that one. Great, like 80s, like synth, like
Oh yeah.
just metal, or not metal, just like great 80s rock power ballad stuff. I don't know if any of those words are the right words, but it is just such great. You got the touch. I digress. All right. With that, we will get out of here. I appreciate every single one of y'all reaching out. As always, you are spectacular. We got a Patreon. You guys want to catch us a smidge early? I'm also going to, if Lyssy ever says anytime we get to an interesting point when Lyssy sends me a shocked text, I'm going to start posting those on there too. A little window into the soul.
The way my brain works.
So very cool stuff though. It is awesome that we love this ride. Appreciate you guys downloading. Hopefully everyone did their homework. You're not a Patreon subscriber. You got to tell one person a week. Just one. You can tell
Your mom
or your dog.
I actually was talking about recording the podcast, and one of our doctors, she actually has read the books. And
Oh, no way.
I was like, well, you can
Get it.
check us out. So, Dr. Aljinovich, if you get this far, hi. I think it's awesome.
It is a lot like the Dresden Files, where you're like, just stick past the first few novels and episodes, and like it gets okay. Like Dresden Files gets really good.
Better.
It gets better, I promise.
Yeah. And that's the thing, we're reaching our stride. We're figuring out we
are like so close to listenable now. Like we are knocking on the door.
I love it.
We are the podcast was on fire at gmail.com. The podcast was on fire at gmail.com. Patreon.com. I think you have to search this because it's a weird number. I probably fucked that up, but that's where we're at. Incognito, if you will. Pod was on fire at X, formerly known as something that made no money, but at least didn't hemorrhage money, as what Madly is doing now. Same thing on the podcast was on fire on Mastodon. Podcast was on fire TikTok. Podcast was on fire Facebook. All the things.
Yep.
And yeah, say what's up. See me on the street. Chest bumps. Love a good chest bump. Yeah. Anything else to get us out of here, Ice?
I'm good to go.
All right. We certainly are. Thank you guys again. We appreciate y'all. Patreon subscribers, you are so ridiculously amazing. I am going to send out messages to try to get some addresses because I do want to send you your bookmarks, your swag, courtesy of 13 Star Designs, our friends at facebook.com/13 Star Designs. 13's all spelled out because the number version is spooky, but when you spell it out, 13 Star Designs. Appreciate you guys so much. I will see y'all on the next one. And I have been Josh.
And I am Alyssa.
The podcast is on fire.
And it wasn't my fault. And that's the thing too, where like I'm a huge klutz. I run into things, and the number of times where like you see stars But like, it was like, okay. Or like, you know, swimming backstroke head in the wall,
Oof.
going full speed. That's a fun one.
How the timing of that just has to be perfect.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And, you know, it's just